Not sure where everybody's going to sit.
Standing room only.
Standing room only. All right. I think we're only going to try to go through a little bit of this morning. Let's go to the book of Numbers. Ha. Ha, ha, ha. All right. Book of Numbers. Another one of those books that's kind of intimidating when you first start it, because the first 3 chapters is just numbers. So-and-so begat so-and-so, and there was this many people from this tribe and this person and all that. So kind of look at this, try to get an idea of what's going on with it. Let's go ahead and pray, and we'll get started. Father, thank you for your goodness to us, and thank you for safety traveling this morning. Lord, I pray that you'd bless any of those that are still on their way this morning, that you'd give them safety. And Lord, I pray that you'd bless our time together. Even though we're few in number, we know that you're here with us. And I pray that you would bless us and speak to us through your word. In Jesus' name, amen. So the book of Numbers, now you'll notice there in that blue box, that first blue box there, in the Hebrew, the book is called In the Wilderness. Because in the Hebrew, the books of the Bible take their name from the very first word in the book. Because it was a scroll, so you open it up, first word that you saw, that was the name of it. So in the Hebrew, it's in the wilderness. We get the name from the Greek translation and from the Latin translation of the Hebrew, where it's in the Greek, it's arithmoi. We get arithmetic from it. In the Latin, it's numeri. But we get our word numbers from that. Something else to point out here is when you look at the very first word in our English Bible, what's the first word there? Isn't it hard? Word, not letter. Smart Alec. And. Very first letter is and. Meaning that this is connecting this with the book of Exodus, and it's connecting it with the book of Genesis. And so these first 5 books of the Bible are all connected together. They are one revelation of God to the people of Israel. That's how it's supposed to be viewed. They're not necessarily viewed as separate books per se, but separate volumes of the same revelation is how this is coming across the people of Israel. Now, notice here in your notes, the book is called Numbers because of the 2 numberings of the people of Israel. So in the first couple chapters, you have a numbering of Israel. And this is from that first generation that comes out of the Exodus. Then later on in chapter 26, you're going to have a second numbering of the children of Israel. And this is at the end of their 40 years wandering in the wilderness. And it will technically end of 38 years wandering. They come into the plains of Moab just before Moses dies, just before they cross over the Jordan River to go into the land of Israel. And God is going to have them take another census of people that are able to go to war. Now, why would he need a second one? What happens during those 38 years that they're wandering around in the wilderness? Yeah, that almost the entire first generation dies off. Anybody that was 20 years and older when they came to Kadesh Barnea and did not believe God, that entire generation dies off. And so now, those that were 20 and under at that time, they're growing up during this period of time. They've all had kids. And so now, they come into the plains of Moab, getting ready to go over, and they have to take another census. Because now God has to establish his army once again. So now, notice here from, this would be the third paragraph, from their wilderness wandering, they slowly learned the lesson that there are consequences for their actions, whether they are for or against God. Every action has a reaction. There's always going to be some sort of a consequence. Whether it's a good action or a bad action, there's always going to be a consequence that comes from it. And this is what they're going to learn during this time of wandering. Now notice here, next paragraph, Moses wrote Numbers when he was in Moab with the people of Israel. So this is going to be written near the end of Moses' life. And the theme of the book is the disciplining of God's people because of their unbelief and disobedience. This is what continuously comes up in this book, is God disciplining them. In fact, we'll see here in several weeks, because we might take a break from this on account of Christmas and stuff, we'll see that God brings up the fact that the children of Israel have resisted and rejected him 10 times, and he's judged them all 10 times. And this is just going to be a theme as we go through here, that God is judging his people. They're not going to escape his chastening. And notice here, except for 5 chapters, nothing is recorded of 37 years. There's a large gap of time where nothing's recorded. Most of what goes on, I'm sure a lot goes on. They're traveling a lot during that period of time. All sorts of different things that they're experiencing, but nothing's recorded, except for just a few chapters of a few instances being recorded. Nothing is said there. And it's interesting to know that these years are stricken from the record of the Hall of Faith. When you read the Hall of Faith there in Hebrews chapter 11, you go through, by faith, they came out of Egypt, and then by faith, they go into the promised land. That whole section of these 40 years is stricken from the record. Why? Because it is a time of unbelief and disobedience for the people of Israel. And so it couldn't go into the Hall of Faith. The people, this is your last blank there, the people were in unbelief. All's not lost, however, because as a result, lessons were learned during these years. In the wilderness, the nation was purified by weeding out the rebellious generation. And this nation, made of ex-slaves, was finally molded by God into a nation ready to obey and enter the promised land. So we finished up the book of Leviticus. Leviticus deals with their worship, the worship of Israel. The book of Numbers is going to deal with the pilgrimage and their walk. And this is where we're going to see some application towards us. Keep your place here, and let's go over to the book of 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 2. First Peter 2, verse 11. Dear beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul. Having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. This is exactly what Israel was during this period of time. They're pilgrims. They're traveling around. Now, just as Peter tells us in the New Testament, God wanted his people to be holy and separate, to be a light to those Gentiles. Was that generation a light to the Gentiles around them? No, not at all, because instead of being separate and distinct from them and being a testimony of God's holiness, they're actually engaging in the wicked behavior of these people that they're living amongst as they're traveling. And so we see an application there. Israel's going to learn this lesson. If you notice over back in Numbers in chapter 25. And we'll get into the specifics of this when we get to this. But chapter 25 was kind of getting into the last straw. God is going to severely chasten his people here. We read about this in the book of Revelation as well. In chapter 25 here, verse 1, Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods. And the people did eat, and bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And the Lord said unto Moses, take all the heads of the people. Now, that's not talking about the leaders of the people. That's actually talking about their heads. Take all the heads of the people and hang them up before the Lord against the sun. The fierce anger of the Lord may be turned away from Israel. And Moses said unto the judges of Israel, Slay ye every one his men that were joined unto Baal Peor. And behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses, and in the sight of the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he rose up from among the congregation and took a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. So the plague was stayed from the children of Israel. This is a hard lesson to learn. God wants the people to be separate. He's told them several times, and all of the book of Leviticus is about this very idea. Be holy, for I am holy. Be separate from the world around you and from the nations around you. Don't engage in those things. In fact, you're supposed to put all those things away from you and not suffer it at all. And here, Israel goes, and they engage in those very same things that God told them very specifically, don't do. I mean, we're not like that, are we? I mean, we give Israel a hard rap, but we do the same things, do we not? But we see here very specifically, in a very dramatic way, God chastening his people. We're not exempt from this. Now, it may not be that, we bring somebody before the church and kill them, obviously. We don't want to do that. We're not supposed to do that. That's not our job to do. But are we exempt from God's chastening as his children? No, not at all. In fact, Hebrews chapter 12 is all about that very issue, that we are subject to God's chastening and will not escape it either. This is one of those mysteries that we have a hard time balancing. God is a loving God, a compassionate and merciful God, but he is also just and holy and a God of wrath. How do these balance together? I don't know. I don't know how they fit together. Perfectly, anyway. Obviously, you and I understand what it's like to, at one moment we can be compassionate, at one moment we can be full of wrath, and they can take place within a matter of seconds. And most of the time when we're full of wrath, it's not okay. Usually we're getting upset about things we shouldn't actually be upset about. But with God, that never happens. God, in his person, is able to perfectly balance his holiness, wrath, justice with his mercy, compassion, and love. Don't know how it works, but it does. That's why he's God and we're not. Now let's go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, because we want to also note that this is not something that we just pass over. There are people out there, I guess you could call them hyper-dispensationalists, or, that's probably just the best term, where they say, that's all Old Testament. That doesn't have anything to do with us. We can just leave out the Old Testament. They say, we're New Testament Christians. Well, of course we're New Testament Christians. And, of course we believe the New Testament. That is our primary revelation to us. But that doesn't mean we cast off the Old Testament and don't use it at all. Because the Old Testament, we're still learning about the character of God. And notice, the Old Testament was not written for the people who already experienced those things. It's like Israel going through the wilderness, they come out the other side, then Moses writes it down. He didn't write that for them. They were there. Who is it written for? Notice chapter 10 here, 1 Corinthians verse 1. Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were what? Our examples, They're our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Verse 8, neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. So you notice what Paul is doing. He's taking examples from Israel's history, and he's saying, don't follow their example. You don't follow their example. Verse 11, now all these things happened unto them for ensamples. Now ensample is just an old English way of saying example. Example, ensample. Exact same word, mean the exact same thing. There's no difference between those two. It's just the King James translators, when they were translating this, they wanted to use diversity of wording just so it wasn't so wooden in the way it's worded. It says, now all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So notice Paul says they are written for our admonition. They're written for us. He says, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Now notice here in your notes, verse 11, the word world refers to the last age. Okay? So this age in which you and I live in, this age between the first and second coming of Jesus Christ, this is the last age. This is it, before Christ sets up his kingdom. We're it. It's kind of like this stuff's written down to us and given to us so that, kind of like a charge to say, finish well. End this thing on a high note. Because everything before the cross really kind of ended on a very low note. Now, you guys finish well. Learn from their example. And so this clearly shows us that the Old Testament is not at all irrelevant for our day. The events were not recorded for the people that it happened to. Notice your last paragraph, Paul says they were recorded for us so we could learn from their example and learn the mind of God in these areas. That's why we have it. We have the Old Testament. It is God's revelation to us. God had it penned and preserved for us, this last age, this last generation. Now let's go back to Numbers. Look at, we'll just finish up this first page here. Numbers chapter 1. Verse number 1. Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of the congregation, on the first day of the second month, in the second year, after they were come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take ye the sum of the congregation of the children of Israel, after their families, by the house of their fathers, with the number of their names, every male by their polls, from 20 years old and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel. Thou and Aaron shall number them by their armies, and with you there shall be a man of every tribe, every one head of the house of his father. So what he's doing here, notice there in verse 3, the very end, thou and Aaron shall number them by their what? Armies. See, God is establishing a census of who can serve as the Israeli military. This is what's going on here. So here in your notes, chapters 1 to 10 describe the preparations for the departure from Sinai. So they're at Mount Sinai. They've been here almost a year. They've been camped out. And the book focuses on the record of Israel's travels in the desert from Sinai to the encampment of the second generation of Moab on the east side of the Jordan River, ready for battle. It is important to note that when they do both counts, they are only counting the men of war. The only people they're counting are those who are old enough and able to go to war for Israel, and not every individual that is living. This further establishes the theme that Israel is God's army. Now you remember back in Genesis chapter 15, or maybe you remember back, that's been a little bit ago, but in Genesis chapter 15, God is officially confirming the Abrahamic covenant with Abraham. And what he says to Abraham is, at the end of making that covenant, he tells Abraham, now your descendants are going to go into a land that is not theirs, and they're going to be slaves for 400 years. And in the fourth generation, he says, they're going to come out when the iniquity of the Amorites is full. So Abraham right now, at that point, was going through what is today the land of Israel. He's among the Canaanites, among the Amorites, and they're an idolatrous people. They're a wicked people. But essentially what God is saying is, this iniquity that you see, Abraham, is going to get really bad. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick these people out of the land. But it's going to be after your descendants have been slaves for 400 years. I'm going to make a nation. I'm going to make an army. And they are going to be my arm of justice. That's what God's doing with the children of Israel. And so while they're in Egypt, among the most powerful army in the world at the time, God is preparing His people, raising them up. He brings them out into the wilderness. He's going to teach them. He's going to march them. He's going to turn them into a military force that can't be reckoned with. And then He's going to bring them in as a judgment upon the Amorites. They are going to be His army, His military, as they go in. And so that's going to be their purpose. The numbering of the fighting men and the arrangement of the camp, which we'll get into next time, was for military purposes to protect the tabernacle of God, as it was the symbol of Israel's separation from the world and their being set apart to God as His chosen nation. Anybody have any questions, thoughts on any of that? Yes, sir. Us. Sorry. Paul says they were recorded for us, so we could learn from their example. Okay? All right. We'll take a break then.